By looking at our last test, I think I didn't do a very good job clarifying about some of the cause and effect and flow of the earliest periods of human history. This is a short presentation I really want you to think about as we go through this. And after you do this presentation, I have 16 questions I pulled out of the last test. And if you get 80% of those tests right, or I think a little over 80%, if you get 13 of the 16 correct, I will give you a 80% on the last test too. So it'll be a double bonus. So please pay attention to this. And I want to try to clarify something so that we can get it right. There we go. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That was said by astronaut Neil Armstrong when he stepped on the moon. But it kind of is an interesting piece when we consider the many steps humanity has taken in its epic voyage from hunter and gatherer to the societies that we hope to see in the future. And that's what the picture demonstrates right there. So, a general idea here we have to consider is some of the very essential nature of humans that we're pack animals. Humans are pack animals, and in order to meet human needs, humans, like some other animals, have to work together. And the packs that humans create, we call societies. And the trend is over time is that human societies that are more complex tend to push out those that are less complex. Think, for example, that it's the isolation of the Yanomamo who allow them to continue to live the way they do. That if the government of Brazil decides, well, we just want to knock them out, they have the power to do so because Yanomami's simple civilization doesn't have the technology and organization that could defeat a powerful state society like Brazil. So that's a trend that we see playing out years and years over decades and centuries and millennia. Human packs are called societies, and societies have organized different aspects of what we would call in studied spice, different social structures, different political systems of authority, different ways of using the land that we call interaction. The sea is cultural patterns, the way of thinking, the way of communicating, their knowledge, their belief in God, and economic systems that allow them to meet their needs. And different societies have found different ways of taking the energy of individuals and having them work cooperatively to meet human needs. And societies acculturate their new members. That's how cultures continue over time. Just as you watch your little brothers and sisters learning about how to become big people like you, that pattern has repeated itself over thousands of years, maintaining aspects of human society. But acculturation is not a perfect process, and cooperation and creativity create new patterns of acculturation, and that pace of change is becoming increasingly quick. More complex societies require more complex patterns of acculturation. So, for example, think about how much education you need to be successful in 2020 and compare that to a medieval peasant who would be able to make a living for himself without even able to read and write. It's been a long road. Well, in evolutionary history, it's actually been pretty short that human existence on the scale of life on Earth or on the scale of the geology of the entire Earth is pretty small. But if we talk about Homo sapiens sapiens, which is who we are biologically, we're looking at maybe 200,000 years. And with only maybe the last 4 or 5,000 years being the concern of what we do as historians. Some of the first aspects of culture we see emerging in Africa as old as 100,000 years ago. And 80,000 years ago, some of these Homo sapiens sapien populations were leaving Africa and moving into Eurasia, in Europe and Asia, and eventually into Australia, the islands of the Pacific, and into the Americas, probably as recently as 10,000 years ago. We call this earliest age of history the Paleolithic age, and we know that humans at that time lived in small bands between 10 and 40 people as they lived as hunters and gatherers. The existence was relatively fragile in competition with animals that were they hunted or were hunting them. Very few societies today still live that way. We saw that in the case of the Yanomamo people in Brazil. But each society that existed as they moved apart on the earth, as they diverged, developed their own unique patterns of spice, different languages, different different spice characteristics, and even different racial characteristics emerging on the order of tens of thousands of years. I thought this was interesting. It just gives you an idea of the scale of human history. If humans, all human existence is just a fragment of a fingernail, where everything up to your elbow on your body would represent the history of life on Earth. And the beginning of Earth itself would take you all the way back to your shoulder. So it gives you the idea of scale. All right, the Neolithic Revolution. This was a pretty, on the scale we're looking at back in that, it's relatively sudden, but we're talking on something that emerged and unfolded in years of thousands of years of period of history. Not tens of thousands, but certainly not within years or even dozens of years. We see the first Neolithic societies in the Middle East, and this pattern of discovering food production and animal domestication occurs in many regions around the world, we believe almost independently, meaning the people of China figured this out with their own biology, what was available to them, the plants and animals around them, their own ecology, differently than maybe how it worked out in Mesopotamia or in New Guinea. Papua New Guinea was also a site of early agriculture. At this time, these people were learning how to tame some animals that they once hunted, or that had once hunted them, and they converted their energy into agriculture, into transportation. And the select breeding of animals and plants made both more productive and more helpful for humans. And when humans were farming, this marks the beginning of the Neolithic age. It didn't happen in the same place in the same time. Indeed, there are places still, like we saw with the Yanomami, who have not been directly impacted by this. But when the Neolithic revolution would take hold of a society, we see differences in select patterns of settlement, trade, specialization. These are all very important developments that occur, meaning all aspects of spice are going to have to shift to accommodate these more sophisticated economic patterns that coming out of agriculture. And over thousands of years of history, this is going to really represent a chain of events that would create the general scope and the general flow of world history and what we do in the study of it and what we're doing now as living in a sophisticated society. These agricultural needs required transforms in spice, all aspects of spice, because farming required more interdependence, more cooperation within groups, and these more complex technologies and more complex societies required a great degree of acculturation. And the transition, again, over a period of thousands of years, we see social patterns become more specialized. You have a special class of farmers, eventually slaves, too. You have people like merchants, artisans who produce some of the goods. So we start to see the development of hierarchies where people were richer and more powerful than others, which is different than what in societies like the Yanomami living in a Paleolithic type style where everyone was generally equal. Political systems, we see something called state building, where people take authority and they hold authority, oftentimes under the guise that they're doing it for God. But by directing resources and organizing militaries, they were able to make strong the first states on the earth. These are political systems. Cultural patterns, new technology, and particularly writing, are going to help protect and connect society. And the economic systems, which are drawn from farming, are going to allow people to become more interdependent. And we'll see a special class of merchants and eventually down the road, coinage. Writing is the hallmark, though, because writing would impact all aspects of spice. Writing became a way that these complex societies could manage even more complex interdependent patterns. For example, contracts between buyer and seller. Eventually, the accumulation of knowledge that priests would have about the effects of nature and how the gods work. Codes of law, all of these things could be written down, and these ancient societies were able to create the first libraries, the first collection of knowledge that could be passed on intergenerationally in their perfection without having been memorized. Writing is a powerful instrument, and it was a more focused acculturation, and societal values become more permanent in terms of their in the written word. And writing communication also for us, as what we do in class, creates the first civilizations. It divides prehistory into history. For the first time, human societies could write books of their deeds. They could give us share their ideas and thoughts, their laws. We no longer have to infer them from other artifacts. So it is the work of writing that brings people and societies to the interest of historians. Prehistory is generally the work of anthropologists, and historians are only passingly interested in prehistory. Generally, the study of history, and if you look at any history book, is a story of state societies with writing systems, generally speaking, and draw that through to the present. Some societies, like American Indian societies, are often left out of history books and are more, again, of the realm of anthropologists. So we look at this pathway of literate, settled societies, which develops in the earliest civilizations in the wake of the Neolithic. That's what we're going to be doing in the study of history. So if I had to do this in one slide, this is a problem I think a lot of you have with the test, is how did these things kind of unfold over the period of thousands of years? Earliest humans come out of Africa. Some stay in Africa. They form their first societies, and as they drift into different regions, they diverge and develop different kinds of spice. Some of these societies learned how to produce food, and they're scattered. We see them in the North and South America. We see them in Afro-Eurasia, even in parts of the Pacific, developing independently ways of managing the environment, becoming food producers. This transition is going to create increasing interdependence as well as settlement patterns, which are much different than that of Paleolithic people. We see the development of hierarchies of wealthier and poorer people. We see state building, governments and militaries and tax collecting. These are some of the events that mark the first historical civilizations, all held together by that most important development of writing. Civilized societies were small and fragile. We've studied four of them: Mesopotamia, the Indus, and China and Egypt. There were others too, but these societies planted the seed for the course of historical development that we'll be following. Well, gosh, close to the present day as we're allowed to. So take a look at that, get the big picture, that last slide in particular, and then we're going to have you take that quiz again. If you get yourself a 13 out of 16 on the quiz, you do well with that, and I'll change your grade on the last test. Good luck.